As a reminder, always seek out training from the shop supervisor or the technical director before attempting any task or demonstrations in this video. If you have never performed a task that I discuss or demonstrate, especially if it is one of the more advanced tasks or operations, you should only attempt them under the supervision of the shop supervisor or the technical director, especially if it is your first time doing so. If you haven't done something recently or would like a refresher, ask to be retrained or have the shop supervisor or technical director supervise you performing the task. As always, be safe in the shops, on stage or backstage, or in the production support areas. This is the vertical panel saw. It will be used largely to cut sheet goods, though it can do some other things like ripping, but it's just easier to use the table saw for the ripping. The ripping functions are just an alternative when you don't have a full-size table saw. If you're handling plywood a lot in your shop, you probably need a panel saw more than you need a table saw. It's hard to wrangle big sheets of plywood onto the table saw. We largely use this for rough cutting plywood down to smaller pieces so that we can manage it on the table saw or on other tools. But it can do more precise cuts. You just have to, be a little bit more precise with your setup for it. Safety operating procedures are posted on the tool or next to the tool. These procedures represent the most important safety operations and considerations while using this tool or equipment, but are not intended to be comprehensive coverage of every possible use. For more complete safety instructions, please refer to the tool and equipment user manuals. Do not use this machine unless you have been instructed in its safe use and operations and you are complying with college and departmental shop safety guidelines and procedures. Safety glasses are required and must be worn at all times. All saws require safety glasses as minimum eye protection. Hearing protection is recommended. This tool does generate loud and high-pitched noise during operation. But if you are using this saw repeatedly, you should wear ear protection. Long or loose hair, neckties, and loose or baggy clothing must be contained. Tie back or tie up hair, roll up long sleeves, tuck in your shirt. A dust mask or respirator may be required for some operations. Rings, watches, and loose jewelry should not be worn. Gloves should not be worn while operating this tool. The maximum material sizes for the Safety Speed Manufacturing Model H5 are posted at the machine. Maximum height is 64 inches. Maximum thickness is 1 3/4 inch. Pre-operational safety checks. Locate and ensure you are familiar with all machine operations and controls. Controls and adjustments may vary from tool to tool, particularly among different manufacturers of the same type of tool. Ensure the blade guard is present and properly functional. Adjust the guard if it hangs up or does not move freely. Do not operate if guards are missing or faulty. Ensure the saw head travels smoothly along the full length of both guides. Adjust the lock knob as needed for smooth travel. Ensure the cord keeper and dust collection hose roller are functioning properly. Only use panel saws when they are secured to the floor or to the wall. A freestanding panel saw can easily tip over onto the operator during normal operation. Check your workspaces and walkways to ensure that no slip or trip hazards are present. Pick up cut-off scraps. Sweep up sawdust regularly. Always use the dust collection system if the saw is attached to one. It essentially has a circular saw head attached to this, and it runs along these two rails. You slide your piece of plywood or sheet goods in here, your saw is up here, you turn it on, and you bring it down, and you cut all the way through. You bring it all the way back up, shut it off, and pull your piece out. You can set stops and jigs and cut repeated cuts, so you can do things like that. Just have a little more setup time again. It has a lock knob here. And the lock knob is designed so that you can turn the head 90 degrees and do ripping cuts, and you can lock it into place. I've locked it down here just so it's visible in the video, but usually it will be all the way up in the topmost position. Now here's the challenge with this, is that if you are on the short side, you're going to have a tough time reaching this handle. And the handle is how you operate it, bring it down all the way down to the bottom. And it's got a spring retraction here that pulls it back up. You're going to be tempted, if you're on the shorter side, to grab this. This is the dust collector port. It is not designed to grab and operate the tool with. So don't grab the dust collector port and do that. You also want to use the dust collector every time you're using this. And you can tell when it hasn't been used and people have repeatedly used it, because this little clear tube here fills up with sawdust. And then it doesn't do anything if you turn the dust collector on. The dust collector is over here, and it is shared between the table saw and the panel saw, and there are some blast gates down here. If you're only using the panel saw, close the blast gate to the table saw and open the blast gate to the panel saw, and vice versa. If you're only using the table saw, close the blast gate to the panel saw and open the blast gate to the table saw. If you're using both, open both of them. But if you're only using one, you're going to be more efficient with your airflow if you have the blast gate for the one that you're not using closed. That way more cubic feet of airflow can go to the tool that you are using. The on-off switch is this paddle right here. It's a Milwaukee head, but the manufacturing of the saw is manufactured by Safety Speed Saw. The tool is actually a Safety Speed Saw. It's got their logo here. It has an 8-inch blade. That's a very, very unusual size. You'll have to hunt down to get spares for that if you own one of these. 8-inch blades are not available at the local hardware store. You have to go to a specialty blade shop. And I've got a couple of spares in the shop, but they're not something you can just run down to any local store and get. There's supposed to be a knob here, and the knob is missing, but you can take the knob and the saw should rotate 90 degrees. That's where the knob would be. We don't really use that function, but it's part of the saw's capabilities. We are going to only use it to cut normal cuts. Always make sure that it slides along these two guide arms easily. Sometimes people will tighten this down and then it will drag and be hard to pull. So make sure that knob is loose and it slides through the entire length of the way. And make sure that this cord keeper up here is not getting in the way of things, that it's secured, that you've got enough travel for the full length. And also the hose, make sure that the hose goes over its rollers. Sometimes it gets pulled out and then people don't feed it back through properly. But the dust hose should travel forward all the way with it and all the way back. The panel saws are supposed to be locked down or secured down. This one is bolted to the floor. They're either supposed to be bolted to the floor or bolted to the wall. If it's just sort of leaning against the wall, there's a risk that it could collapse over on you while you're using it. So it needs to be secured to the floor or the wall if you're using a panel saw in some other location. Operational safety checks. These are safety checks you must be aware of at all times while using the tool, and you must check them and perform them every time you use the tool on every single operation or cut. Always allow the blade to come to maximum speed before proceeding with the cut. Never start the saw with the blade touching the material. Slow, consistent movement is best. Do not force the saw to cut too fast. Lumber must lay flat against the support at all times. Use hold-down bars or clamps for material under 1/2 inch thick. In theater, this will most likely be 1/4 inch plywood, 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch masonite, and 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch luan. Before clearing waste and debris, switch the tool off and wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. Before making adjustments, switch the tool off and wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. When cross-cutting, always cross-cut top to bottom. Return the cutting head to the top position after cutting. Wait for the blade to come to a complete stop before removing pieces. Cross-cutting must always be supported by a minimum of 2 rollers. More rollers is always better. When ripping is safer and more accurate with the table saw. Best to use the table saw for any rip cuts. Check the orientation of the feed. Ensure the saw head is oriented properly. Also make sure you are feeding from the correct side. The smaller cutoff piece should always be on top of the blade when making rip cuts. The work needs to be long enough so that it is always resting on a minimum of 4 rollers. Never use push sticks while ripping with the panel saw. I do have it positioned so you can sneak a piece of plywood past the table saw over the dust collectors and slide right in here. So it's kind of got a direct shot from the lumber rack over through here. It'll be easier with 2 people, 1 person passing it through and 1 person catching it through. But then you can slide it along here onto the rollers. And make sure it's flat and held down. We'll pull the power. And that's basically it for this saw. You can line it up. It's a little bit hard to line up for accurate cuts because if you mark your lumber here, you've got to get under here, you've got to get back under here and eyeball your lumber on the saw and line it up. There's a shroud here that covers everything to protect your hands from the blade. So there's really no good way to line it up easily and accurately, which is why I use it for rough cutting and trimming. I do have a laser level here. It needs the battery replaced, but I've been unable to get this calibrated very well. I can't get it lined up, and when it is lined up, depending on the thickness of your material, the accuracy of the line in relationship to your cut changes. So it's been kind of it's a little aftermarket add-on, and wasn't really happy with it, so I may seek out a different one. I'm just chopping up this old stage 4 masonite, getting ready to chop it up and throw it away, so I'm cutting it down into manageable pieces that I can take to another saw and cut up into smaller scrap. It's real common to not go down all the way and not go down far enough. So make sure you go all the way down and all the way through. The saw does have a maximum thickness that you can cut, and the maximum thickness is 1 3/4 inch. You can't cut anything bigger than that. And there is also a maximum height. This is the H5 saw. I think it's 64 or 65 inches. You can't go any higher than that. So I'm running 4-foot sheets through there. It's 48. So I can orient a taller piece and cut up to 64 inches. But that is the maximum. And we can see already from just the little demonstration that I've done that I've completely clogged up my dust port here, and it's not going to work properly, and I'm just going to make more dust here. So going forward, we're going to clean that out, and we're going to use the dust collector. only cutting 4-foot wide stuff. It just adds one more task to you on every cut, is that you're going to lock that down in place, and then you're going to unlock it before you move it. So essentially with this machine, you're using a circular saw, but you've got a greater control of accuracy for 90-degree cuts with it. So if you're freehanding a circular saw cut on a large sheet of plywood across a couple of sawhorses, that accuracy of that cut is all going to be about how you can follow the line and how you can keep from deviating, and then correcting as you go, and then messing up the cut because you're correcting and overcorrecting. This one can cut a nice 90-degree cut exactly where you want it, as long as you futz with it and get it lined up. So it's real good for that purpose, and it's real good for taking large sheet goods and cutting them down into smaller, manageable pieces. These are potential hazards to be aware of while operating this tool. This tool can produce kickback of the saw head while cross-cutting and kickback of the material while ripping. This is a cutting tool, so it will be expelling flying chips and sawdust. Chips and sawdust can be propelled at high speeds and cause injury to exposed skin. Always wear protective clothing and PPE. When this tool is in operation, the blade is exposed, presenting a potential point of contact for injury. Always be aware of where the blade is and keep yourself and others away from the blade. Flying chips and sawdust could cause eye injuries. Always wear safety glasses while using this tool. Noise levels can rise above 100 decibels. Protect your ears by wearing hearing protection while using this tool. Ensure the saw head travels along the guides freely and avoid any potential pinch points during operation. Do not use faulty equipment. If something is not working properly, or if you suspect something is wrong with the tool or machine, please report this to your instructor and/or to the A&L technical director. Never cut small pieces. Remember that cross-cutting operations require the material to be supported by at least 2 rollers, and ripping operations require a minimum support of 4 rollers. Never operate by holding or pulling on the dust collection tube. Only operate by grasping the handle of the saw head. Never stand on the tool. Doing so could damage the tool and affect its ability to make accurate cuts. Never reach under the saw or the workpiece. Never use a step stool, a chair, an apple box, or other device to reach the saw head. Do not climb on the tool to reach the saw head. Do not overreach. Never cut multiple pieces at the same time. Never leave the tool running and unattended. Housekeeping. Turn off the machine and return all guards to fully closed positions. Remove any cutting stops or jigs. Leave the saw ready for use by the next person. Pick up waste material immediately. After each cut, pick up your scraps and off-cut lumber and place it in a trash receptacle. Sweep up sawdust regularly to keep the floor from becoming a slip hazard. Cleanup procedures for the panel saw. Sweep and vacuum the floor as needed. It's going to create a lot of dust in this position. Dust and sweep off in this channel and off of all of the panel parts, and then sweep and dust and vacuum out of the back here. You may also use the air compressor to lightly dust out the saw head mechanism and the dust collection mechanism here and get the dust off of that. Probably you want to do the air compressor before you sweep and vacuum below.